You start hearing more and more labels, and when you hear labels, you know dehumanization is happening. And
Oh, yeah.
we do it because we're like, well, we're feeling good about these people suffering, and we'd only do that to bad people who aren't deserving of nicer treatment. Therefore, the more you express nasty feelings towards this group, the further you're having to make them other and push them out of the circle where you would normally feel concern and sympathy and empathy, because you have to justify why you are feeling the Schadenfreude. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Simply Human YouTube channel and podcast. I'm Christina, Caro, licensed clinical psychologist.
And I'm Karen Lynskey, a leadership and self-trust coach.
So today we are continuing our exploration of the hidden part of the Johari window, which is that aspect of human experience that is known to ourselves, but not known to others, because we are purposefully keeping it hidden or keeping it private. And today we're focusing on one particular emotion called Schadenfreude. And that is a German word that means Schaden equals harm and Freude equals joy. So it's this concept of the experience of joy when someone else experiences misfortune. And we may not know that word, but this is a really common human experience. It's that pleasure we get when someone that we think is too full of themselves or getting away with stuff, and then they're finally held accountable, or they finally come down off the pedestal, or whatever they're inflated about finally is like bursts. And you feel that little bit of pleasure inside yourself. That is Schadenfreude, and it is a natural human emotion. But there are some benefits to it, and there is a dark side to it. And I wanted to explore it because at this recording, it is January 2025, and Schadenfreude seems to be almost reaching epidemic levels in the United States. And there is more and more polarization and tribalism here in the United States, and that increases the potential for indulging in Schadenfreude. And so I felt that it was important because with that increase in this tendency to indulge in Schadenfreude is an increase for the potential for the dark side of this emotion. And I felt it was important to address it head on so we can take it from the secret hidden pleasure of what we experience to start to maybe be able to talk about it openly with our friends, to question in ourselves, and maybe to try to bring it into the open a little bit more, and also just making more conscious choices about whether it's serving to indulge in Schadenfreude.
But before we start, please hit that subscribe button and don't forget to hit the notification button as we bring out new episodes. So, Christina, let's go back to this word. I kind of want to say, let's do it 10 times. I want to test on whether you could say it 10 times fast. But let's just we'll try at the end. The Schadenfreude word. Tell me, why do we experience that? Why do we feel that joy when someone's experiencing this pain? And guys, I love about this because this is a new term for me. So I'm learning a lot and be asking Christina some questions just like you might be asking. Let's start with that experience.
Sure. So there's been research on Schadenfreude for the last 30 years. Scientists,
Wow.
sociologists, psychologists, neuroscientists have been researching the experience of Schadenfreude. And what they have discovered is that it is actually hardwired into the brain. So when they do these fMRIs, that's the functional magnetic resonance imaging, what they'll do is they'll have either people read a story of someone who was doing something bad and then a bad thing befalls them. So remember, Schadenfreude is the pleasure we feel at someone else's misfortune. And they can see in the brain that what lights up is the pleasure centers of the brain. And they said it's about similar to the pleasure we experience when we have a really good meal. So there's an aspect of satisfaction and pleasure that lights up in the brain when we observe someone else who we think deserves the misfortune actually experiencing the misfortune. I remember coming across this study. I was actually doing research on oxytocin, which is a neurochemical that enhances bonding and social connection and social sensitivity and processing those social emotions. I was looking at some research for looking at ADHD actually. And when oxytocin, which is how we bond, it's like when mothers have a baby, their oxytocin levels go up.
Yeah.
There's also another vasopressin, which is another neurotransmitter that is released also with oxytocin. And vasopressin increases territorial and protective behavior. It also drives bonding and procreation, but it has this role of territorial and protective behaviors. So when you put the two together, oxytocin, I explain it this way to clients. Oxytocin makes us want to bond, and vasopressin makes sure, one, we're not bonding with the wrong person, or if we're bonding, that there's this protection to keep the unit safe. And what they found is that parents of newborns, both fathers and mothers, because their oxytocin is up, their tendency for experiencing Schadenfreude also increases. So yeah,
Oh.
it was really a wild study. So they think that it has to do with when there is an infant, there's a need for this protective, the oxytocin, we're bonding with the baby, and then the vasopressin is saying we have to be protective. They're not, there's not a lot of research, but this is beginning research. And so they're starting to wonder if there is this really almost primitive part, because these neurotransmitters come from our lizard brain, that is about a regulation of the social environment around the infant to maximize safety and protection. So, you come around and you're behaving badly. You're being roughhoused around, or you didn't wash your hands before you come over and you want to pick up the baby, like this protectiveness comes up, and then if something bad happens to that person, you're kind of, oh good, that shows you to not do that, right? We see it as a regulating of social behavior.
Oh,
So
that's
it's
so
hardwired.
interesting.
And it's a related study where they were looking at children as young as 9 months old. And they were observing that at 9 months, there's already a sense of social justice. And what they would do is they would have puppets. So they would have 3 puppets, and there'd be a puppet who was being mean to another puppet, and then a puppet that was being nice. And not only did the 9-month-olds prefer the nice puppet, but they would want to see the mean puppet, like something bad happen to it at 9 months old.
At 9 months old, that is
At
amazing to me at 9 months old.
nine
It's almost
months.
like they're protective, though.
They don't entirely know. They don't understand what necessarily the motivation is, right? Because it's a 9-month-old. So the
Mm.
9-month-old can't tell you the why. What they do observe is the phenomenon of the preference for the puppet that is
Good.
pro-social.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
not only
Yeah.
rejection of the mean puppet, but the feeling that there should be something bad that happens to the mean
That's
puppet.
interesting.
So then as that develops, so there's already a sense of justice. So this is the basic sense of, there seems to be this innate sense of justice. And Schadenfreude is then the emotion that develops, that is the joy when that justice happens, when that bad puppet experiences something bad themselves. We start to have this emotional component to it. So again, we can only observe it as a phenomenon. We can't explain the
Mm.
why. We can only say, this is what we're observing behaviorally.
But it's so interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the evolutionary perspective of that too. This allows me to understand like the competitive dynamics and some of the social stuff that's happening. So explain
Mhm.
to me more about this, because I think it also creates that good and bad, right? Labels, right, wrong. So talk a little bit about what you can from that perspective for me.
Yeah, there's a field called evolutionary psychology, and this is
Oh.
exactly what they focus on. Like, what has evolved in our development from the primitive brain that we continue to experience today? Because Sometimes it continues to service as humans.
Mm.
Sometimes it doesn't. If like when we can understand, oh, this is happening, this fear response happens because we used to think there was a saber-toothed tiger, but now it's our neighbor. Like we probably don't need to be having that level of response, but it is in our evolution. We develop this wiring now, this kind of reaction. So that's evolutionary psychology, looks at how things evolve. And so when they look at Schadenfreude, they are observing that there's aspects of understanding social status and competitiveness. And what they're thinking is, back in the caveman days, or when we were, not a whole lot of humans around,
Mm-hmm.
that if you were wanting to basically procreate with this cave woman over here, well, if your competitor, who is also trying to court that cave woman, breaks their leg, good for you.
Yeah. And you're
Now
just so
you can go.
excited. Yeah, because you have an
Yeah.
opening, right? Yeah, I get
Now
it.
you see this competition is innate within us to be competing. And so they feel that this might be one aspect of why we take pleasure in our competitor's downfall. Because whether or not it's hunting for scarce resources, oh, your spear broke. Oh, good. Like I can go and be the hero to bring the prey back to the cave. Or whether it's I get to mate with that female. There's a social psychologist from the University of Kentucky who researches this. And he said, basically, anytime someone suffers a misfortune, that's an opportunity. And
That's
so that's,
true.
yeah. But there's also social psychologists. So social psychologists look at the psychology in groups, to make it simple. And they've been researching this as well. And one of the things these researchers just from Emory University were looking at were that there is a tendency to enjoy somebody's, it's like a revenge almost. You enjoy somebody's downfall because then you feel better about yourself. So that's more of a envy could be the driver of that. I envy that person. Oh, this bad thing happened. Oh, good. I didn't like that person anyway. So they've found 3 subgroups of Schadenfreude, which one is aggression. They found that there are people who just enjoy watching, when they see someone who they think are other, something bad happening, they just take pleasure. There's just an aggressive component. The rivalry that we spoke of just a few minutes ago is like, oh, if you break your leg, now you're not a rival of me, yay. And then there's this justice component that it's like, how dare you deserve this. So there are different explanations. The research is happening from all different angles, from the neuroscience to the social science to the evolutionary science. And we know that it is hardwired in humans because of this desire for justice, because of rivalry, competition, and aggression. And then we see it. What would be helpful, I think, is to talk about how it shows up in our everyday life.
Yeah. When you were talking, it's so interesting because you call this thing about the other. It's like it creates more of a division, like you're seeing something more as the other. I was even thinking about my parent when they watch the Dance with the Stars and they like certain ones and don't like other ones. And when someone does really bad and they tell me who to vote for. And I don't know if that's the case, but I think it's this thing of like you love them. And then when something happens to someone else, you enjoy their downfall, which is what you're talking about. Is that part of the competitiveness of even like people get invested in celebrities, right? And they want this one celebrity to do really well. When something happens to the other celebrity, they're just so excited and just joyous, right? Or is that not really Sheldon?
Well, Schadenfreude, remember, it is really strictly about pleasure on the downfall of someone. So it isn't about celebrating the success of
Okay.
somebody that you like. That's not
Yeah.
Schadenfreude.
Okay.
Schadenfreude, it's very specifically the pleasure that you get from the downfall or the misfortune of somebody else. That's Schadenfreude right then.
So tell me a little bit of some of the other ones you're thinking of that are common scenarios that you've run into.
So we're talking about competition right now. I was thinking about, I don't know how many football fans there are out there, but a few years ago, there was this streak with the New England Patriots. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
you heard about the New England Patriots, they would keep winning like Super Bowl after Super Bowl after Super Bowl. And then the New England Patriots became the team you love to hate,
That's
and
a perfect example. I get it.
so there's two things about Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude is the pleasure we feel at someone else's misfortune, but there's also anticipatory Schadenfreude, where we know we would feel good if a bad thing happened to someone we feel is being unjust or someone who is deserving the downfall. Then we can get into this longing for that comeuppance. And so it's a longing for it, just like we long for any emotion. Like we long to fall in love, we long to feel joy, right? We have, oh, I can't wait to go on vacation. We're anticipating the pleasure of vacation. It's the same with Schadenfreude. We can anticipate that pleasure response, but with it, it's attached to someone else experiencing something bad. And this is
Yeah.
the difference, right?
Yeah.
Like,
And I think
it's one
that's
thing to anticipate falling in love
yeah.
or anticipate enjoying vacation, but this is about anticipating the pleasure of someone having something bad happen to them.
Yeah, and I could think of it happen in the workplace, about someone who they're just arrogant. Right? And they're considered a favorite and they are very, what do I want to say? Like they're always smoothing. No,
Schmoozing?
cruising, always very good upward, managing upward, but sucks. But
Mm.
actually very bad downward. Very good upward, horrible downward. And you want them just like, I just wish they would just be known for who they really are. And they
Mm.
really screw up because they're just saying they're the yes person. They're the yes. I can't believe you can't see there's a yes person there. This is how I know. I personally have felt that. I know other people have found, and or the favorite kid or something. You keep creating the story. He's the favorite or something, never gets in trouble. And I just want him to be found out, right? But then when he does, I get so much joy. You're right. Like when he does finally get smacked, it does. Like something really fails, and then it gets me so excited. Am I starting to get what the term means?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that is, you're starting to get it. Like, let me give you another recent example, and I'll give you both sides because really what drove me to want to do this particular episode on this secret emotion is because of my concern about what is happening in our country. And so, where we're seeing Schadenfreude is so pervasive now is in the political sphere, and it's across the spectrum. So, you have the left or Democrats or whatever you want to call that side of the polarity. There was all this desire for the Schadenfreude. So when Trump, say, got indicted, there was Schadenfreude. Like people were like, yay, finally, he's being held accountable. He got indicted. Then he got convicted. Yay, finally, he's being held accountable, right? That's that justice aspect where there was this pleasure around it. But on the other side of the spectrum, then he wins the election and then MAGA's like, yay, those, liberal cheer. Like they're so happy to see the left like depressed and sad. And they're like, yay, you elites, you think you're better than us. And so they're happy. They're happy. We're sad. We're happy. Their person they love is in trouble, right? And it's just, we're talking millions, tens of millions of Americans are deep in Schadenfreude around their tribe. I think that's a really important part to talk about this modern
Wow. Yeah.
polarization and
Yeah.
tribalism.
Yeah. And it feeds the division over and over and over again.
Yeah. So it is another socially natural aspect for human beings to identify as being part of an in group, and then there is an out group. And we see this from the beginning, from childhood. So this is a natural human thing, is to identify with a tribe. And it has been magnified, I believe, by social media. It's
Oh.
social media. It is when cable news came out, and we went from having like 4 or 5 channels on television
Mm-hmm.
where all Americans got their news from the same place.
Mm-hmm.
Walter Cronkite, the
Mm-hmm.
Peter Jennings, these trusted all Americans, we trusted Peter Jennings. When something bad happened, we were all watching, we were all getting the same information. When cable news 24/7 came out, it's stovepiped, right? When Fox News came out with a mission that says, we're never going to let what happened in Watergate happen again. We're going to have our own network, and we're going to have this very specific point of view, and we're only going to amplify what we believe. So it was a very biased lens. And now, if
Mm.
you align with that, you can only go there. and you only hear one perspective. And if you were more liberal, now you have MSNBC. You only get your news from there. So we started going from being unified into now stovepipes into media that fed us what we were already prone to want to agree with. And then it becomes more and more in group, out group, more polarized, more narrow in our perspective. And it has created this massive polarization in the country, and polarized in group, out group, us and them, there's more likely then to seek Schadenfreude, because I want something bad to happen to those people because I think they're bad. I think they're pedophiles, they're racist, whatever our labels are, is that there's this concept of calcification, like calcifying. When you think about
Does that mean like hardening? Like it's hardening?
hardening.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's hardening. This is why it doesn't really matter what happened in the political debates. It really doesn't matter anymore what comes out, what facts come out. What they're finding is it doesn't move the needle, that these tribes have become calcified. So they're becoming immovable. And that is undermining the fabric of our ability to be flexible as a society, to be resilient as a society together. So let's look like a little bit more recently. I'm right now in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first time ever in a natural disaster, this in group, out group, us, them mentality is actually manifesting, where there are this Schadenfreude attitude of either, with those Californians, they're a-holes or they're elite or they think they're better than us. And, oh, those were all celebrities. Oh, there's a wealthy people who lost their home. Yeah, maybe we won't give them aid. That's their own damn fault for building there. There's just this complete lack of empathy. This is brand new. This lack of empathy for fellow Americans who have suffered a horrible natural disaster and tragedy. Like we've never seen this before. And this is, again, what motivated me, is my concern about what's happening to us as Americans and our loss of empathy.
When you were saying things earlier, I kept thinking about, when we bring in information, right? It's the assumption ladder, and we keep getting information. We either throw it out or where we are, right? We either accept that information. And when you have this division that you already start to, so you listen to the Fox, you listen to the MSNBC, right? The idea is the fact that you're choosing the information and they feed you more along to. So even if you hear a clip on social media that's from MSNBC or CNN or whatever, you'll just throw it out because your brain won't even hear it because, like, oh, that's them. And then you just focus on that. And that's how it allows for the calcification, because you're still feeding. That's why there's so much misinformation, because you don't even know which is right anymore. Like you said earlier, before, when there's only the regular news, you knew because there's only one source.
Yeah.
But now I can't even decipher what's right and what's wrong because everybody has their different perspectives, which makes it more difficult, I think.
Yeah, it's a psychological or a cognitive process called confirmation bias.
Oh, okay.
So confirmation bias is I already think something, and so then I am biased towards the information that reinforces what I already think. And this is something that the human brain does. It's a cognitive error that we need to be aware of. And we need to actually combat against confirmation bias, which is we need to actively seek information that challenges us. A matter of fact, in scientific research, one of the things you do is you have a hypothesis, but you also have to explore, is my hypothesis wrong? Is there data that it's wrong? You have to be open. You have to actually list, here's all the information that came out of the study that contradicts what I expected to find. So the scientific method is a lot better at being a little more resilient around confirmation bias, because we know in research, this unconscious bias is there. We built into the process of research ways to mitigate confirmation bias, just seeing the data that confirms our theory. I know lawyers, when lawyers are preparing their case, they're not just preparing the side to argue their side and how they read the law. They will then come and argue the other side just as well. So they can see, like, okay, where am I missing something? But your average person in the world, that's not how we work. We're very prone to confirmation bias. We actually feel a gut sense this is right, because our brain already thinks it, and we like to reward it with what it already thinks it's right.
Yeah, and then I could see how you have that, and then you get that emotional response that we've been talking about of pleasure. Oh, this proves it, that proves that response that again, and you want the other side to be hurting. So I was trying to put the two together and how they fit well together. You
Right.
know,
So there's confirmation bias, there's tribe, like all these things are coming together, you're seeing.
yeah,
So there's the
exactly. I see it.
tribalism, in
Yeah.
group, out group, and then this emotional reaction, Schadenfreude, where we take pleasure when the other experiences some sort of misfortune. Now, there
Hmm.
is some research by social psychologists at the University of Connecticut. And when they were looking at all of the research, they said the same thing. It's like, well, Schadenfreude is hardwired. In itself, it isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's like saying being angry. Eh, We're going to feel
Just that.
anger. We're just
Yeah,
wired to
exactly.
feel anger. We're
Yeah, right.
wired to feel envy. We're wired to feel joy. We're wired for Schadenfreude. The problem is what Schadenfreude can turn into. And what we're seeing happen is dehumanization of the other. So there was a Dutch study, and it found that the more Schadenfreude a person experiences, the more he or she subsequently believed the negative stereotypes of the other. So if I was feeling a lot of Schadenfreude towards Los Angelinos who lost their homes, like, oh, they deserved it. Now, there's going to be a cognitive dissonance in myself because I won't see myself as someone who takes pleasure in someone else's suffering. So, in order to overcome the cognitive dissonance and my sense of self as a good person, then there must be a justified reason why I'm feeling pleasure at their suffering. So my mind will come with a whole bunch of explanations.
They'll
Oh, there's
rationalize the behavior. It'll
to
rationalize the behavior.
rationalize it, to
Yeah.
say, oh, well, they deserved it because dot, dot, dot. They deserved it because
Ah,
they're immigrants. They deserved it because they voted for Trump. They deserved it because they voted for Kamala. They deserved it because they live in
because
California. They deserved it because they live in Florida. We will come up with all these, but it can get really bad. Like they deserve it because they're not really human. The other becomes less
they're
and
the
less.
rich.
Yeah, they're just the elite. You start
Yeah.
hearing more and more labels. And when you hear labels, dehumanization is happening. And
Oh,
we're
yeah.
we do it because we're like, well, we're feeling good about these people suffering, and we'd only do that to bad people who aren't deserving of nicer treatment. Therefore, the more you express nasty feelings towards this group, the further you're having to make them other and push them out of the circle where you would normally feel concern and sympathy and empathy, because you have to justify why you're feeling the Schadenfreude. And so then as I start to devalue the other more, and I look at them more as a rival group, then it
Ah,
could lead to tacit acceptance of discrimination or even hatred because, oh, they deserve it. No empathy, not even a moment grace.
wow.
Just
Yeah, I could see
gone,
that.
just gone. As we are losing our ability to have empathy. So unchecked, Schadenfreude results in the erosion of empathy across, whether it's ideological, religious, territorial. We just across the board start eroding empathy.
So when you think a little bit about it, you said that it's a natural emotion, right, that we rarely talk about. But what's a critical question that you want us to ask ourselves? What is the thing that you really want us to do? What can we do about this?
It's really important to understand that just because something is natural in the sense that there is this hardwiring that was
Uh-huh.
there from back in our caveman days, we have to ask, does it make sense now? And in this case, is it ethical? Is it
Mm,
contributing to the betterment of our society? Just like we should do the same challenging of our implicit biases, of confirmation bias.
mm.
Am I disregarding valid information just because it doesn't line up with my preconceived theory? Because that is going to get you flawed information. So just because something happens doesn't mean we shouldn't challenge it. So we need to understand that Schadenfreude, there's some benefits in the sense of it has that protective equality.
Mhm.
There's an aspect of promoting justice. Like we want to see people held accountable when they do something that is contrary to the well-being of the group and the
Mhm.
tribe.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, if we keep it hidden or unconscious, it can become really destructive and promote hate. It can
Yeah.
amplify prejudice, even violence. And it's important to recognize that we have to be aware of it and actually actively work to moderate it. And I'll admit, I wasn't happy, let's say, with the outcome of the election. I will own that. But I indulged in Schadenfreude watching these videos called, hashtag FAFO. And what FAFO is it stands for F around and find out, which is it's really just indulging in the pleasure of watching people who voted for Trump discover how they have voted against their own interest.
Oh,
That
interesting.
aha, like, oh, I voted for him, but what do you mean the Affordable Care Act is the same as Obamacare? I thought he's just getting rid of Obamacare. I don't want to lose my insurance.
Mm.
Oh, I mean, there's literally people putting up TikTok videos crying in the car about how they were all in for Trump and then found out that, oh, wait a minute, I have a kid with special needs and they need an IEP. What do you mean you're getting rid of Department of Education? What do you mean my kid won't get, they need this stuff in their school? And so there's just like these videos, like people compile all these videos of this sudden awareness, like maybe this was a bad idea, right? That's that misfortune. And, those of us who are just unhappy, like feeling that a bad thing has happened and you who voted for it are, deserve what you get. That's Schadenfreude. And I finally noticed, like, oh, I'm indulging in it. I am actually telling myself to have no empathy.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
had to catch that in myself.
Yeah.
Okay,
And it's so
Christina.
easy to find. That's the problem. So easy to find out there to like kind of make you think like that. And like you said, make it more and more calcified, as you kept saying. I think that's the whole point, though, about you have to, like you just did, stop. Like you have to realize
You
it.
have to
And that's
stop.
that self awareness and realizing that you're getting too caught and that you are not inquiry and understanding and remembering about each person as individual and you can't put them in a group, right? I think the
Yeah,
more that we can get as individual
we have to go back to our values.
values.
So
Yes.
in my value system, because values are higher order thinking,
Mm-hmm.
emotions come from that lizard brain. And the thing is, I have values around empathy, compassion, acceptance, diversity, fairness. And so my indulging in this kind of Schadenfreude was not even aligned. That was an emotional reaction, but it wasn't even aligned with my values. This is
But is
what it
that
means.
why you
What can we do?
is that why you had some dissonance though? Would we always feel dissonance or we don't always feel the dissonance
No, I
especially?
didn't feel dissonance
Yeah.
initially
Yeah.
because, like I said, there's that justice aspect
Yeah.
of
Exactly.
Schadenfreude.
The fairness for it. Yeah.
Yeah, so there wasn't dissonance initially. I was aware of that concept of Schadenfreude.
Mm.
And I knew that's what was happening. I knew that's what the emotion was. So right now, what I'm role modeling is I could have not shared that with you. I could have kept that hidden and been afraid, like, well, I don't want our listeners to think either I'm a bad person or they're going to say, oh, she's a liberal. I'm not going to watch her show anymore, whatever. I'm willing to risk that, to be honest, to say, I'm going to
Uh-huh.
bring this from the hidden into the open
Mm-hmm.
because that's part of becoming responsible for the choices I was making. I was indulging. I was indulging because I was feeling like scared and depressed and worried for communities that I care about who I know
Mm-hmm.
will suffer and be in
Mm-hmm.
pain. And so, yeah, my justice part went, oh, good, you're suffering now because this is all your fault. And I indulged in that as a way to distract myself from the fear and the worry and the concern. And that's not helpful. That's not helpful. So I have to work on this on myself. And that is just being an empathy, just really refocusing on, you know what? everybody's coming from a place where they think this is the right thing. They're not coming from being mean. Just like me, it's coming from a place of they've been told, we're all being told something that causes us to polarize. And so then we're all making the best choices possible based on the information we have. And
Exactly.
we all have we probably have some positive intentions there. And we have to just stop and be more discerning and critical in our thinking. We have to become better critical thinkers, and we have to decide whether or not empathy and compassion is one of our values. And are we actually, compassion shouldn't be, oh, you get compassion, but you don't, because I don't agree with who you voted for. That can't, we're doomed as a society if that's where we go. So what we can do is be critical thinkers in terms of challenging ourselves, be willing to be honest and open about this emotion, notice if we're indulging, and then reorient back to our values. And then hopefully compassion and empathy, kindness is in there in our value system. And then make your choices and spend your energy in ways that align with those values.
And Christina, I just want to say, on behalf of myself and our listeners, I just want to thank you for bringing this up because this really fits into one of our topic of simply human. Because the more and more we understand how we're wired in certain ways, become more aware of it, that's when we can be better humans and improve the world and the world that we live in. So I just want to thank you for being so vulnerable in this moment and choosing this topic, which, and again, thank you, everybody. And we look forward to our next discussion. And until next time.
Don't forget, be kind and be curious. And we'll see you next week. Bye.